It's 2025, and Severance is finally back for its second season. The first season was in February of 2022. But there have been writers' strikes, and actors' strikes, and production delays, and all of that stuff. And so it's been 3 years, and we're finally getting a new season of Severance. Now, season one was phenomenal. We loved it. We're not sure how to talk about season two without spoiling too much. So we're going to try our best because we know there may be some of you out there who listen to this podcast who may not have watched season one. At which point, I highly encourage you stop listening to us right now, go watch season one, and then come back. But boy, does season two kick things off with a bang. So season one ends on a massive cliffhanger. There are a whole bunch of revelations about our characters. And season two kicks off in a way that doesn't just have your protagonist running, but has your mind racing as well. Like, I think it is one of the best opening 10 minutes of a show. There is so much that happens. And they kind of cap it off by introducing a teenager into the world of Severance, which already throws you. It's such an interesting way to throw you because you're like, what is this teenager doing here? And how did that even happen? And how is that even allowed? And so there are all of these things that happen within the first 10 to 15 minutes of the show that has you going, how did that even happen? Why is this even allowed? And I think the questions that the show sets up drive you through this season. It's a great character piece, and there is so much happening in Severance, but it doesn't shortchange you with regards of the mystery box that the show is setting up. So many shows, mostly J.J. Abrams shows, always tend to set up a mystery box that end up being disappointing despite the character work being great. Lost, Fringe, Alias, like it's all problematic when it comes to the reveal of the mystery box. I think with Severance, the mystery of season one was still very satisfying, but left enough to go into season two, which is setting up a new mystery box that I feel the writers are paying attention to in a way that'll end up being satisfying as well.
Yeah, I agree. I was concerned coming into season two because the way season one ended so long ago, it would have been so easy for them to fail, right? To fall down at the first challenge, which is the first episode. But that first episode kicks you right in the teeth and just makes you pay attention. And I think as much as I love all the characters, all the separate character storylines and their relationships, etc., blah, 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 I love that the show hasn't forgotten that we still don't know what Lumon does.
No.
And that's still important.
It's the weirdest data processing you will ever see in your life.
Yeah, but it's still important, right? That
Yes.
question feels like an important... Yes, we want to know what happens to Adam Scott's wife. Yes, we want to know what happens with Bert. However, we still don't know what's happening at Lumen. And in fact, in season two, they introduce a new thing. They introduce a new thing about what this particular group of macro data processors are doing. No, actually, they don't even tell you what it is. They just give you the code name. And even then, you're like, holy shit, what is it doing? So that was enough. I felt like they give you enough sugar cubes to just like remind you that there's this bigger rabbit's foot that you're not dealing with yet.
But also, I think why the show is so successful in holding on to the zeitgeist is because I don't think there's anything else on television that speaks to the chaos and the complexity of our lives at home versus our lives at the office. Like, sure, this is an extreme sci-fi example with innies and outies, etc. But I think when you break it down, we relate to it because there are so many elements that feel real. Real is the best way to describe it. Like, yes, there are ludicrous sci-fi elements to this show. But at the end of the day, I think it captures work life perfectly. There is a way these characters interact with each other, like how these colleagues interact with each other. And yes, it is an extreme example with rules and company schedules and behavioral codes of conduct and all of this stuff. But in any major corporation, those things exist. And they do play out in stupid, silly ways that you really shouldn't be doing outside of preschool. But yet, we conform to it even in our 30s and 40s and 50s. And I think that's what's fascinating about the show. I mean, it does what all great science fiction does, right? It takes home truths and kind of expands it into extreme elements to tell interesting stories. And Severance does that so well.
You know what it is? There's a real comfort to the way they're telling the story. There isn't any risk in them dropping any of the story elements that they're all juggling at the same time, right? Because there's a bunch of story elements happening. There are the innie relationships, then there are the outie relationships, then there's all these things happening with Lumen, and none of them fall by the wayside. Just when you forget, or sorry, just when you think that everybody's moved past what Lumen's doing, suddenly, boom, Gwendolyn Christie's character shows up, and you go, "What the fuck is happening there?"
The other thing that I think that Severance does very, very well. For season 1, we had a brief conversation with Ben Stiller, and we spoke about this idea of how it represents its science fiction world. And I think what's very interesting with Severance is that we have no sense of what the time is, in that we don't know how far in the future this thing is. We know it must be at some point in the future because there are certain futuristic elements. But at the same time, those futuristic elements are kept as contemporary as possible so that it maintains a sense of relatability. And so the production design on this thing is so stunning because it sucks you in before anything else can. So even if you watch the first episode of season 1, that sense of familiarity you have with the workplace, with cubicles, with how you interact with your fellow colleagues, all of that sinks in very quickly before you even start running through the endless maze corridors of your office.
Yeah.
Right? So that creates the nightmare based on what you're already familiar with. And it's such a clever play on production that I'm sure the actors must have an absolute blast working within those confines, right?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it adds so much to the way the story is told.
Also, just like you mentioned it briefly, that office is just, I think, the worst office ever. The way the lights are, the way the room is colored, that corridor, it's just sterile and alien and disquieting and uncomfortable, but yet comfortable enough that you're not going to kick up a fuss.
Yeah.
I think the production uses all of that really, really well. I think, and this is sort of going back to season 1, even just the, in air quotes, rewards the organization gives you for hitting certain targets, right? Hey, you get a jazz party, you know? Hey, what was the other one? The pizza party was that one? And then you get a mug with your face on it. But if you do even better, you get a little desk globe thing with your face on it. I remember that first season when the team break into, I think, one of the storage closets and find out that these things are already prepared and they could just grab it.
Yeah.
It just almost feels like this real move of defiance on their part, which I thought was beautiful. And I think that leads into season 2's new rules, right? Now they have a hall pass that they can go out. They can supposedly speak their mind without being worried about being overheard. And I think that relationship that Lumen has with these 4 people is going to make for an interesting season 3. God, I hope season 7.
For me, Severance is the best example of how you take disparate sci-fi concepts and merge them in new and interesting ways. Because when you think about it, it's got elements of The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine. It's also got a bit of 1984, a bit of Brazil. They're playing in the same sandbox. And it's clearly inspired by all of these great works of fiction. But it's doing its own thing with it. And for me, season 2 feels stronger than season 1. I'm actually preferring it to season 1 only because all of the hard work of setup is done. So all of the questions that you have of what the fuck is going on is mostly answered by season 1. And now that you're familiar with the world and that the writers and creators have confidence that you understand the world, they can then break the world and take it in new directions.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing that very well as well. So
Yeah.
they're shaking you out of the comfort you feel following the end of season 1. I use comfort loosely because the whole show is fucking discomforting. Like every episode, there is no greater justification for a weekly release than Severance because
Yeah.
you need time to process. Like we got all of the episodes in advance and I still couldn't binge it because I needed time to process what the fuck was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Yeah.
I'm really loving season 2. I think it's one of the best things on television out there. And you really need to do yourself a favor and watch it if you haven't. Like season 1, catch up on everything and then jump into season 2. Also, it's one of the things where there are only 9 episodes and you have to watch season 1. You can't just jump into season 2 because you would have no idea what's happening.
And look, because it's a weekly release,
You've got time.
look, I know the show is dropping out tomorrow, but you don't have to watch episode 1 of season 2 immediately because unlike something like Game of Thrones where spoilers abound immediately, you can like start season 1 now, right? Do one a day, you'll be done in about a week, and then get into season 2, and then you'll be beautiful. You'll be great.
And you know what else? It's not work. It's not homework. This is one of those shows that doesn't feel like homework because
Yeah.
all of these episodes are so well written, so well shot. You're constantly in awe of how everything is. It just feels really satisfying. It
Yeah.
is just such good content.
Yes.
Yeah. Ugh. Severance, man. Fucking hell.
So good.
So good. All right. Severance season 2 drops tomorrow on Apple TV Plus. Tell me, Bahir, do you know if they're releasing the first 2 episodes or just the first episode tomorrow?
I think it's just the one.
Okay, so the first episode of season 2 drops tomorrow. We highly recommend that you check it out. It is fantastic television. Let us know what you think. Let us know your theories as well. We want to know what those are. Now, for your theories, please DM us and not just comment on the Instagram feed because spoilers. You know how to find us. On Instagram, we are Goggler.my. You can also email us if you have extended theories on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. An additional note, Ben Stiller and Adam Scott have launched a Severance podcast. They're also going to do a watch along with every new episode of season 2, and they too are accepting your crazy zany theories. So if you write into the podcast and it is something interesting, they will feature it on their new Severance podcast. So there's a bunch of stuff to do. You've got some homework. Check it out. Let us know what you think. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.